Coach, on Twitter, you've talked about some of the negativity of Castro's regime. What was your reaction to Castro's death?
To me, it was irrelevant. I mean, I don't wish on anyone to die. It was actually a moment, where I reflected on how lucky I am that I didn't have to live under his regime. I reflected on the struggles of my family, and they were with me in New York. To lose a grandfather, to lose half my family, to all those things which were negative things that took place when they took place. But I also reflected on what a great country I live in, that they took a family of people that didn't speak a lick of English and didn't give them anything for free, but gave them an opportunity to choose to work. And that I have an uncle who showed up on the docks of the port of Miami as a 15-year-old to help his mother since his dad had passed away. And he started carrying boxes for a shipping company at the port after school, after he finished his high school day. And he went from a guy that carried boxes and loaded and unloaded ships to a guy that's very influential in the port of Miami as we speak today. My parents met here in the United States, and my sister and I were fortunate to have been born here. And for a guy who learned English after he started school, not before he started school, that now I can lead the college program at an unbelievable institution like this one. It hasn't been easy, but it was an opportunity that where my parents left was not given to them. And so, it was great reflection. And I'm not saying I don't give hatred time. I can't live with hatred in my heart. That only consumes you in a negative way. Do I like anything he stood for? No. And anyone that applauds anything he was about is uneducated about him, not life, about him, and is completely wrong for doing so. Was he a good man? No. Was he a tyrant? Yes. Was he a murderer? Yes. Did I spend any time wishing him a bad fate? No. Have I hoped that he eliminated himself as a leader of Cuba? For many years, because of my grandmother, because I wanted her to rest in peace. Now she is resting in peace.
Coach, you just mentioned on it a little bit, talking about someone who ever speaks positively, Castro's uneducated. Colin Kaepernick had some comments that seemed to be in support of Castro. I know he came out yesterday saying that's not what he meant. What did you make of Colin Kaepernick's comments from earlier last week that talked about Castro?
Kaepernick can say whatever he wants to say. See, that's the beauty of this country. Colin Kaepernick in Cuba would have been put in jail. Here, he's allowed to express himself. That's why I love this country. We get to speak about whatever issues we don't like here. Think about this. I'm going to give you a little background on Cuba here, okay? Colin Kaepernick would have said what he said in Cuba, he would have put in jail. If he would not have stood when Castro decided to have his, what do you call it when the president addresses the country, the State of the Union. When Castro would have his State of the Union, they weren't for 45 minutes. He had one that went for 12 hours, spoke to the country for 12 consecutive hours. You had to stand there and listen to him for 12 hours. If you chose to take a knee while he was speaking, you go to jail. You know what he did in the late 70s? He created the Mariel boat lift. You know what he did? His jails were overcrowded because back in the 70s, he was still ruling a country that was filled with people that lived prior to his regime. So they understood life is different than the one that he's trying to falsely force upon them. Okay, so those people would upheave and they create uprisings. And you know what he do? He put them in jail. When his jails were too packed, he created firing lines and killed people for going against what his government asked them to do. Well, as you keep going forward in the late 70s, he said, well, I can't keep just killing people. How do I get all these people out of my jails? Well, he created the Mariel boat lift. He said, well, here's the deal. If you come, I'll let you take your family member with you. So all these people would drive their own boats across the Florida Straits. They show up at the Mariel Harbor, and his government people would be there and saying, who are you? I'm so-and-so, and I'm here to pick up so-and-so. Okay, that's 25 grand. So it's 25,000 cash that you had to pay. And then for 25 grand, once you were there, he'd tell you, now here's the deal. If you don't pay me, I'm going to put him back in jail, and I'm going to beat the snot out of him every single day. Now, if you do pay me, you get to take him, but you don't get to take your cousin. You're taking these 3 other people, and you don't know who they were. Guess where those 3 people were? In jail. So he unloaded his prisons through the Mariel boat lift, and he made unbelievable amount of money. Can you imagine what that would do for our economy? If we would unload all our prisoners, our bad murderers, not the mass incarceration problem we have in our country with little petty stuff, but well, that's how he did it for everybody. And he created the Mariel boat lift himself and made it into a money-making machine by emptying his prisons and making money off allowing people to take 1 or 2 of their relatives back home. And that was a mass amount of people that came over, whatever year that was, 79, I was a kid back then. And that was my neighborhood. You know, in the movie Scarface, tents and all that stuff, that was my neighborhood. That's where I grew up. That was legit. Those scenes were legit. So, I don't know. Colin, that's the beauty of our country. He can say whatever he wants to say, and he has the right. The one part that we tend to forget around here in this country is we don't get put in jail for saying what we express, what we feel, but there are repercussions. Because if I'm an employee at the University of South Carolina, I can stand up and say whatever I want to say. The First Amendment right protects me from getting put in jail. That doesn't mean my employer is going to keep me hired. You know, it's 2 different animals, and we tend to forget that a little bit. But in this country, that's what makes this great for me, is that we can express ourselves. We can go on social media like I did last night, and I wasn't arguing like I told Matt Figure. Matt says, man, you were, I said, I wasn't arguing. I was putting down facts. I was just making statements because it bothers me when people that are uneducated about Castro, not uneducated as people, about Castro, make comments making him be a good human being, something that he's not. And all you have to do is read. Google his name and put murder next to his name and read the stuff that comes out. And can you imagine that's only the stuff that's gotten out? When you're in a government like his where he controlled the message, everything that came out was totally controlled by him. Can you imagine the truth when it starts coming out now that he's gone?
Last question to John.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I want to be sure I understand this right. I read that you made a promise to your grandmother that you wouldn't go back to Cuba until Castro was out of power. Is that accurate? And also, is that a place where you would like to visit now?
I know that country through my family's eyes. I don't know it through my own eyes. I think I'll be sad if I see the country, what it looks like now, compared to what it looked like the way it was described to me from my family. But yes, eventually, I'd like to do what my grandmother and my grandfather on both sides were never able to do before their death, is go back to their country and see it. I'd like to be able to do that. An opportunity that was taken away from both of them, from all 4 of them, excuse me. I'd like to be able to do that. And I'd like for my uncle and my mother to go see where they lived at, where they were born at. I'd like for them to be able to experience that one last time, you know. But with all that said, the one thing I don't ever want to confuse is my family, just like the people who live in Cuba now have been, I don't even know, I'm going to create a word here. They've been castricized. I don't know if that sounds bad. But they don't know life other than the regime that they lived under. They got nothing to compare it to. They don't have internet. They don't get social media. They got no idea how people live anywhere other than the ones that have relatives in this country or whatever country and they're allowed to communicate to. They got no idea the freedoms that people live in other countries. They're like I tell our players, I don't believe in putting them in a cage, because if you do, then when they go out to real life, they're going to make mistakes, and they don't know how to handle mistakes. I got to let them live, and I'm going to have to teach them through their mistakes. Well, people in Cuba don't understand how other people live. Well, my family's Americanized. We're proud Americans. My family, their heritage, their home, their land, that's very dear to them and me. Being able to go back and seeing that is very important. But make no mistake about it now. I am a proud citizen of USA, of the United States of America, and I want to do everything in my power to help this country continue to get better.